So the nation or nations that you belong to are a part of your identity, whether you realize it or not. And the nations you feel linked to can change over time because you change. Your identity is made up of individual and collective aspects. How you dress is a way for you to express your individual identity. But if you're decked out in red and white on Canada Day, chances are you've chosen to express your collective identity as a member of the nation of Canadians. Often we use symbols to help us identify and express our collective identity. A flag on a backpack or a tattoo of national symbols can help others who belong to your nation connect with you, or those who don't belong to your nation can identify you as an outsider. And the expression of your national identity can be interpreted in different ways. For example, I was talking to my American cousins about how all of the proud to be an American signs everywhere just seemed weird and almost kind of obnoxious to me as a Canadian. And they said that our more reserved way of expressing our love for Canada seemed like we just really didn't care that much. Okay, maybe we're not always that reserved in expressing our patriotism. So what nation or nations do you belong to? Often people list the nation state they live in as their nation and point out that they know they belong to this nation because they're citizens. They hold a passport as proof of that citizenship. But passports are for nation states. What about nations within a nation state? What's really interesting to me is how passionate we can be about the place we're born in. I am a very patriotic Canadian, but why? I was born here, I'm a citizen, but why do I feel more loyalty to Canada than, say, Portugal, which I feel no loyalty for? Well, it's because the places in which we live and the people we interact with, in part, make us who we are. They help to form our identity. You know you belong to a nation when you have a feeling of loyalty, which can be defined as devotion, allegiance, faithfulness, or patriotism. That's not to say that whenever you're loyal or faithful to someone, that automatically makes it a nationalist loyalty. For example, my mother-in-law moved to Canada from Great Britain. Many of her friends here in Canada are British, but friends and family are considered non-nationalist loyalties. Non-nationalist loyalties could also include being loyal or trustworthy to other members of your sports team or the drama production. But wait, if my mother-in-law has created this friendship because they share the same language or culture, and even the same history, then they're bound by a nationalist loyalty. So nationalism, identity, and loyalty can be intertwined. Great Britain is actually part of the United Kingdom, or UK, which includes England, Wales, Scotland, that's the Great Britain part, and Northern Ireland, that's what makes it the UK. And all of these groups can feel a loyalty to the UK as well as a loyalty to their local region or nation. Or they can feel what we call a conflicting loyalty. Most nations want to ensure that the members of their group are taken care of. So someone in Scotland can feel patriotic to their country of the United Kingdom, but also want to demand greater Scottish control over their region in order to ensure that Scots are being taken care of. An example in my life is my grandfather. He moved to Canada from Italy when he was very young. He still loves his homeland, but is also a very patriotic Canadian. When World War II broke out, he got a letter from the Italian government telling him he needed to come home to help fight the war. Now he had to choose, thus a conflicting or contending loyalty. He chose not to go and fight, but stay in Canada. So our nationalist loyalties will impact the decisions we make. In your lifetime, there's been a big push to encourage people to affirm or celebrate their nationalist loyalties. For example, among our Inuit population, many people had their names changed by Christian missionaries and by the government of Canada. Most Inuit groups didn't have surnames in the past. That's your last name. And so to help the government with keeping their paperwork organized, they gave Inuit people an ID number that became basically their last name. But in the 1960s and 70s, Inuit people began adopting surnames so they didn't feel as if they were just a number, literally. In addition, many of the names of places have been changed to recognize the appropriate name, like Frobisher Bay became Iqaluit. This happens in other countries as well, as Peking became Beijing, Bombay became Mumbai, and Constantinople became Istanbul. That reminds me of a song. By encouraging groups to affirm or celebrate their national identity, we're trying to reconcile contending loyalties. Reconciling contending loyalties means to mend a relationship that's been broken by competing interests. Much of Canada's history with our Indigenous peoples was very contentious, and many attempts were made to have various Indigenous nations conform to the Canadian culture, to assimilate. Today, we're trying to reconcile this by first apologizing for things like the residential school system and setting up organizations and funds to help these nations affirm their identity. Because Canada is so multicultural, it can be tough to find the balance between preserving our traditions while still accepting that we all have our differences. We want to be pluralistic. But because of all of these differences, national and non-nationalist loyalties can come into conflict over various things like religion, region, culture, race, ideology, class. So we have what's known as reasonable accommodation. It's a legal and constitutional concept that requires Canadian public institutions, in other words, government offices, to adapt to the religious and cultural practices of minorities, as long as these practices don't violate the rights and freedoms of others. In other words, we must respect the differences between us. Of course, it's not simple. The most obvious example is the wearing of turbans in the RCMP. Members of the Sikh faith wear turbans as part of their religious identity. But the RCMP had a long-standing tradition of wearing the Stetson hat. When this policy was changed to allow members to wear a turban, some Canadians felt that their cultural practices were being threatened or ignored. But the Government of Canada determined that this was a reasonable accommodation that needed to be made. This event, which occurred in 1990, is still a hot topic for debate today. So as you can see, there's many things to think about when it comes to nationalism and identity. In the next lesson, we're going to look at the historical events that helped to develop those complex ideas.